Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday. Get that out of here. For those of you who are new, we use headphones. At the end, there will be a soundtrack that has brain entrainment frequencies that will link all of our brainwaves together into sort of a global mind link. This is where you can go. Oh, sorry, the wrong one. I'll get that for you at the end. Well, it'll be the same. It'll be scientificsounds.com/universal rhythms. But I'll look that up. This is where you can go to ask a question. Or make a comment about anything that we've discussed here. And this is where you can go to see all of the live streams I've done since the beginning. These live streams build on information from the ones before, so there's a lot there. At this point, it would be hard to watch all of them, but it's possible. I do this once a week, and we give away the soundtrack that I'm working with at that point. I should be able to go in here and find the correct one, though. Let me find it. It should be Universal Rhythms. There it is, right there. So, scientificsounds.com/universal-rhythm. That's where you can get the soundtrack. Download that soundtrack and save it, because they change each week and then they're not available anymore. So these are free soundtracks. I think I've probably given 75 soundtracks away or so, something like that at this point. Today we're talking about rhythms. Rhythm, the concept of rhythm is the foundation of everything, foundation of anything that's alive. And the things that appear to be, not alive, like a rock or a mountain or, dirt or ground, it's only your point of view. Those things are also involved in deep rhythms, planetary rhythms and galactic rhythms and universal rhythms, and the things that they're composed of are in states of rhythmic interaction with other things, like a rock. And you look close enough at a rock, it's made of compounds, and those are made of atoms, and atoms are made of, quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons, and all of those are intense states of vibration. So the rock itself is imbued with rhythmic vibrations at atomic levels and subatomic levels and quantum levels, and at the core of the quantum field is rhythms, vibrational rhythms forming standing waves in a substance that can't be measured, the dark matter. So it's an illusion that something is not alive or not in a rhythmic vibration that's nested with every other kind of thing in the whole universe that's also rhythmically resonating, and all of the things are resonating together in a massive, universally large, unbelievably gigantic rhythmic dance with everything else, boundless inward to the core of the quantum field, and boundless outward in the whole of possibly the realms of multi-universes that are part of something that is so stupendously gigantic that it's impossible to wrap your mind around it. But when we go to the place in ourselves where these rhythms happen, just in our own physical body, there's rhythms within rhythms within rhythms, and all these rhythms are mathematical. They obey the laws that we see active in music theory, octaves and harmonic relationships between rhythms and between vibrations, forming galactic chords of resonant frequencies that are nested together. It's all math. It's all music theory. We discussed this a lot in the past. And all of it, its core, which we've discussed also many times in the past, is the foundation of the scientific evaluation of rhythm in this idea of coupled oscillators. A rhythm that arises between things that want to dance together because it saves energy in the universe to do so. And everything in the universe obeys these laws of rhythmic interaction, of rhythmic attraction, resonant vibration rhythms that want to dance together, because that's how things coalesce and attract and build systems that interact together and work together. Coupled oscillators and biological synchronization, a subtle mathematical thread connects clocks and ambling elephants and brain rhythms and the onset of chaos. Chaos, by the way, what appears to be chaos at one level of interaction is, looked from a higher standpoint, chaotic interactions coalesce together into higher mathematical formulas of rhythms within rhythms. Patterns become apparent when you stand far enough away from what appears to be chaos locally. Is, from a larger standpoint, not chaotic at all. It's all part of rhythmic interactions with larger spheres that when you're too close in the middle of it, it seems chaotic, but that's not so. These are the classic rhythms that are associated with the brain. In our physical bodies, here in this body, we know that there's rhythms within rhythms within rhythms, and the master coordinator of all the rhythms in my biological system is a little tiny organelle inside the hypothalamus of my brain, straight in through here, called the suprachasmic nucleus, the center of my circadian rhythm, the core master coordinator of all the rhythmic interactions with all my systems. Works closely with the pineal gland and the eyeballs, and times some of those rhythms to light cycles of light and dark, day and night, full moon, new moon, things like that. There are other sensory apparatuses in the frontal cortex, magnetite crystals, that are sensitive to electromagnetic field fluctuations, rhythms within rhythms of magnetic field interactions of the Earth's magnetic field and the magnetic fields that are arising from systems in my body functioning. For instance, high school physics, electromagnetism. Reason it's called that is because you can't have electricity without a magnetic field and vice versa. One always is accompanied by the other. So that means that all the neurons firing in my brain down the axons and down my spinal cord and out my nerve roots into my organs and glands, the ions, the electricity ions moving through those nerves are generating magnetic fields at right angles. So now I've got this biomagnetic field. And that can be measured with sensitive instruments. The electrical activity of my heart, that extends out for 6 feet. So if you're within 6 feet of another person, the electromagnetic fields of your heart waves are intermingling. And then that forms a coupled oscillator pair where your nervous systems are linked through a electromagnetic modem, so to speak, a wireless modem connection, where if left long enough, your heart and your pulse and your brain waves will start to synchronize with each other. You'll begin to form a coupled oscillator pair with the electromagnetic field interactions of your heart being the coupling agent. If I touch you, if I hold hands with you, now we have a direct electromagnetic coupled connection through skin conduction. And now we've really physically connected ourselves together like a modem. Now our brains and our nervous systems and our brain waves and our heart waves and will really begin to synchronize up faster. Amazing sort of stuff. Where, you know, the body rhythms here, you have a heart pacemaker in, you know, the autonomic nervous system and in your brainstem. You've got breathing mechanisms in the brainstem. You've got special neurons that control respiration and heart rate right in your brainstem. Body temperature, that's set up by your circadian rhythms. I've sort of discussed this before. If you, because the pineal gland, which is, you know, back slightly and up slightly in the center of your brain, associated with the crown chakra, produces melatonin, and it's, you know, associated in one way with a waking and sleep cycle. That itself is a rhythm. Us meeting here every week at 12:30 on Sunday is a rhythm. We have this rhythm that happens. Periodically there's a perturbation in that rhythm, because I'll do a workshop on a weekend and I have to move this from Sunday to Monday. And most people can make that transition, but it does throw a little bit of a monkey wrench into the rhythmic nature of what we do together here. And any kind of perturbation that happens in the regularity of a rhythmic thing that goes on, that your system begins to depend on to make things work properly. There's a certain amount of perturbation that can enter into the system, and the system can handle that and then come back to its regular rhythm. But if the perturbation is too often or too much of a perturbation, then it can disrupt the system's function and it has a hard time getting back, you know. So if, you know, every other week I was moving this to a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and maybe instead of 12:30 on a Sunday, it was moved to Tuesday at 7 o'clock at night, and then the next week it was, you know, Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then the next week it was, you know, Saturday at noon. This would become completely disruptive, and all of this would begin to fall apart. It would be too difficult to follow. People would start to drop away. But the fact that I have it every Sunday at 12:30 becomes this thing that you can rely on, and your body loves to be able to fall into these rhythmic patterns where I no longer have to think and use extra life energy to constantly follow some new, constantly changing pattern. If I can allow it to fall into a regular rhythmic pattern, I save energy. I save stress. I'm able to fall into something I can depend on. And this, this principle works everywhere. It works in anything you can conceive of or think of, which is why the whole universe tries to create an infinite number of rhythmic patterns that all nest together mathematically, according to what we call music theory. Resonant vibrational frequencies, rhythms within rhythms within rhythms that all nest nicely together and become stable that way. Once you have a stable rhythmic pattern, it achieves a solidity, a stableness that is hard to break. It's hard to break that. And in some cases that becomes something we don't want. It's a habitual pattern, because habits are based on rhythm. So we have a rhythm thing that's set up, and we don't want to let go of that because we've got a system in place that appears to be working, even if it's not perfect. We'll prefer the rhythmic pattern we have than a new rhythmic pattern that might even be better. So in the world of, neurophysiology, it takes 21 days to break a habit, to break a pattern, to break a rhythmic pattern that the body is locked into. So if you can consistently do something different, create a different pattern and adhere to that for 21 days, you will begin to break that in the brain. The brain will begin to adopt this new pattern instead of the old one because of its repetition. But its repetition has to go for long enough for the system to, switch horses onto the new saddle and adopt this new pattern. So, if you want to start going to the gym, then for 21 days, you have to whip yourself into shape, and you have to make sure that you never miss a single day, that you never give yourself any kind of excuse to not do that. That if you can maintain that, if you can get up every day and go to the gym every single day at the same time and establish this new pattern, after the end of 21 days, your brain will be uncomfortable if you don't wake up and go to the gym. Now that's your new state. Now it becomes uncomfortable not to have this new rhythm that you've adopted, which is the thing anyway. It's always uncomfortable to switch patterns. But it's one of the biggest things that we have to do if we're trying to wake up. Because, for instance, the way the nervous system works is from the standpoint of survival. I've got my 5 senses stuck out into the world in order to see if I'm being threatened. And the body's got these 2 rules I've mentioned before in the past. Rule number 1, survive at all costs. Rule number 2, do no self-harm. Get the most work out of the least amount of energy expended. Be ecological. Cut corners. Don't waste energy. That's pretty much it. Those are the rules. And so in order to obey those rules, I establish these patterns of repetition. I try intentionally to create these rhythms that I can fall into to save energy. But we also have sort of brain rhythms. We have brain waves, and those are rhythmic firings of neurons in my brain. Beta, alpha, theta, delta. Beta is 13 rhythms per second up to 38 rhythms per second of firings of neurons. And delta brain activity is 0.5 rhythms per second up to about 4. And for some reason, the speed of those rhythmic firings is directly related to my state of consciousness. Beta consciousness at around 20 hertz, 20 rhythms per second is, externally directed mental activity, focused attention, goal-oriented. And, theta between 4 and 7 or so is sort of daydreaming or dreaming, very different state of consciousness linked with different rhythmic firings of, brain neurons. The thalamus seems to have a large part to do with that, with the rhythms of brain waves. And just underneath the thalamus is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is where, my autonomic nervous system arises, sympathetic, parasympathetic little neurons inside the hypothalamus. That's also where the suprachasmic nucleus resides, the one that's the center of my body clocks, that governs the rhythms within the rhythms within the rhythms in my system. We also have something called ultradian rhythms, which basically means faster than a day. You have sort of a 90-minute cycle with food digestion and feeling the need to urinate, and that's a clock that's in your medulla in the upper brainstem area. You have 12-hour sort of waking, sleeping cycle. that's closely related to circadian rhythms. And the center of circadian rhythms is, the suprachasmic nucleus that I mentioned. Mostly this has to do with sleeping and waking, but it also governs things like temperature and, enzymes in my biochemical system, even governs things like genetic expressions, things like that. The suprachasmic nucleus has sort of 10,000 neurons that make up this little teeny tiny organelle in there. Each one of those 10,000 neurons in the suprachasmic nucleus has its own clock, but all those clocks are timing themselves together, and various of those clocks are tapped into various rhythmic systems in my body and controls those. So we have the suprachasmic nucleus that has a circle of its top lieutenants who it governs their clocks, and they govern circles of clocks below them, and those govern circles of clocks below them. As it cascades through the system, we have clocks on a cell basis. Cellular networks are forming, and they're all resonating together. And in nodes of those resonate together, form a whole organ. And then the organ itself is in this rhythmic relationship to other organs and the biochemistry that's coming from those. In this unimaginable kind of super dance, where they're all sort of synced together with the hypothalamus and the midbrain and the pineal gland, and we're all dancing ourselves to rhythms in the universe, again, to more deeply save energy, to fall within something that we can relax into and not have to use extra brain power to invent a rhythm of our own. We can align with rhythms that are already happening, and we get deeply aligned in that to save life energy, to be healthier, to be more alive, to free our life energy up to do more important things like think and do and self-realize and all of that kind of things. Recently they've discovered that in the retina of the eyeball, so you remember that the suprachasmic nucleus in the hypothalamus is hardwired right into the pineal gland. Pineal gland is sensitive to light-dark cycles because it's derived from the same embryonic tissue as the eyeball and the eyes. So hardwired together is the eyes, the suprachasmic nucleus, and the pineal gland. And it turns out that even with blind people, you're getting light sensitivity into the suprachasmic nucleus and the pineal gland through a third type of receptor in the retina that has only just been recently discovered. That one's called melanopsin. Melanopsin is a third type of sensor in the retina. So remember, there's the rods and the cones. The rods are black and white, and the cones are color. And now there's this third one, which is called melanopsin, which has to do with melanin, melatonin in the pineal gland, which is the hormone that it produces in the cerebrospinal fluid that is governing waking and sleep cycles. And as we said once before, it's also related to high levels of self-awareness. So studies with LSD and mushrooms showed that the only physical thing happening was massive levels of melatonin being secreted by the pineal gland into the cerebrospinal fluid and charging up the whole brain and central nervous system. So now it looks like melatonin has two duties. One has got to do with the sleep and wake cycle, and the other one has to do with the wake and the awakening cycle. Double duty. Body's always trying to get double duty. But when we go back here, now we're looking at monthly cycles where there's larger fish to fry, where in a monthly modulation of hormones and the hypothalamus and the pituitary putting out, hormones that direct the glands in my body what to do. For instance, the human female menstrual cycle. There's another rhythm where the pineal gland is now sensitive to the light-dark cycle of the full moon and the new moon, 28 and a half days. So that means that there's an ovulation cycle that is directed by the sensitivity of the moon phase, which is a rhythm that is 28 and a half days, a very slow rhythm, that my body is adjusting its hormone levels to and ovulating at the same moon phase under which I was conceived. So at the moment I'm conceived, when sperm and egg come together, I'm stamped with a time stamp of wherever the moon phase was at that moment. Later on, when I've grown up enough as a female, I'm still using that same rhythmic relationship to the full moon, new moon, to time my ovulation cycle. And when it gets out of sync, I have irregular menstrual cycles. My body's always trying to get back in step, back in rhythm with the moon phase. So I'll have 2 periods a month, or I'll skip a period. It's like men in a marching band. If you're out of step with everybody else, you try to take a couple of quick steps to get back in step, 2 periods a month. Or you take a big long step to get back in step, skip a month or two. And the fix for that, by the way, is with about 40% of the patients that I saw all the way back to my first years in practice was to fool the pineal gland into thinking the full moon is still shining through the window by burning a tiny little light bulb over by the window during the 2 weeks of the new moon, when there's no moon shining. The pineal gland will still see a light there and think, oh, the full moon is still shining, so I can reset my clock. Same thing with seasonal affective disorder. Now the pineal gland and the suprachasmic nucleus and those special sensors in the retina are timing a deeper rhythm that has to do with the seasons, right? The seasonal thermostat of my body, So when I'm in the middle of winter time, where it's usually 20 degrees outside, if we had a really hot day of 60, we'd be pulling our jackets and sweaters off because it's a hot day. But if I teleported you in the middle of summertime, where it's usually 90 degrees, and you get a really cold day of 60 degrees, you're putting a sweater on. And it's the same temperature, 60 degrees. And your body thermostat is set differently throughout the year as the pineal gland complex times my body thermostat to the length of the day. And the length of the day is never the same 2 days in a row, because the length of the day is getting longer and longer and longer and longer to the summer equinox, and shorter and shorter and shorter to the winter equinox. Right? So we're constantly, slowly setting the thermostat, and that's all to save energy. I have to maintain 98.6 degrees or I die, so maintaining my internal body temperature with my body thermostat with the season is critical. If it breaks down, I have big problems. Depression, suicide, collapse of my stress handling system. The fix: expose a person to 1 hour a day of full spectrum daylight bulbs to fool that network into thinking the day length is longer, and resetting that clock. Getting back in the rhythm of relationship to the cosmos, so to speak. And that's what I'm talking about here with seasonal, yearly rhythms, kind of things that has to do with seasons. When those rhythms get disrupted, we have all kinds of disorders that result from that. For instance, like epilepsy, where the rhythms within different zones in the brain, particularly between the right and left hemispheres, are so disrupted that the brain is constantly trying to get those rhythms to line back up again. And it works itself up into a brainstorm trying. And the fix for that is what we're doing here with headphones, with binaural beats, 2 tones slightly out of tune that create a pulse that entrains your brain waves and forces the right-left hemispheres to synchronize That opens up all those pathways that aren't working when you've got epilepsy or ADD or ADHD or dyslexia or concussion or PTSD or all these other kind of conditions that all have those things in common with them. Each has their own kind of things that go with them, but underlying all of them are this idea of networks of rhythmic relationships of how brainwaves work together in pathways of communication. And we can clinically improve that with binaural beats with headphones, which force those pathways to open up and fire signals down. And if you do that every day and create a rhythmic pattern of every day, you're going to a gym. And everything in the body works that way. The more you use a certain function of the body, the more those pathways improve and get bigger and more strong and more permanent. And I can do those tasks easier and easier and easier the more I work them. So if I'm working this, I'm turning a footpath into an 8-lane highway over time. But time is the key. Rhythm of repetition, of creating a groove for this to happen is the key to it. So if I want to meditate, I have to do it. I create a rhythm of meditating. If I want my meditation to be who I am, if I want self-awareness to be a major factor in my life, then I have to work it into my life. I have to create rhythms of awakening throughout the day. I have to decide that every time I wash the dishes, that will be a meditation. Every time I open the front door, it'll be a meditation. You know, every time I do this or I do that, or I create something that allows me to continue that. And I work more rhythms and more rhythms into it. Anyway, so, you know, so many, you could spend a week just talking about all the kind of rhythms that happen. Taste buds renew themselves every 26 to 36 times per year. Electrical impulses are conducted through nerves at a speed of 180 feet per second. Hair grows roughly 6 inches per year. I mean, these are all rhythms. Brain quadruples in size between the age of 3 and 5, reaching 90% of his adult dimensions. A heart beats at rest 60 to 80 times per minute. There's a rhythm. You know, 86,400 to 115,200 times per day. Stomach produces digestive enzymes that break down food for up to 2 hours. So there's a rhythm, digestive rhythms. Liver can process 1 standard alcohol beverage per hour. It produces up to 1 quart of bile a day. There's a rhythm. Large intestine absorbs water and electrolytes for roughly 24 to 30 hours before sending undigested food to be evacuated. Another rhythm. Sperm cells generate at a rate of 50,000 per hour. It's just sort of unbelievable. It's like goes on and on and on. It's all these nested rhythm patterns that are in synchronized pulse with each other in the system. There's this whole, Meridian Chi Flow that happens in a 24-hour clock, where the chi energy flows from one meridian to the other. Actually, each meridian has a high tide at a certain time of day. Brain waves, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Now we discovered new ones, epsilon and gamma and hypergamma and lambda, borderline brain states, and default mode network, extremely small, slow brain states. Now we have this new one in cognitive neuroscience, development of the auditory specific brain rhythms in infants. So remember how I said that the first thing that all of us experience in our life is our experiences in the womb. And the only experience that we have in the womb as a sensory experience is sound and vibration, because your nose and mouth don't work because you're in fluid, and your eyes don't work because you're in the dark. So, and sound travels through water 5 times better than it does through air. So the only thing activated for those 9 months is vibration sense of my skin and hearing through the water, amplified through the water. And that has a direct effect on establishing brain rhythms, establishing the rhythmic characteristic of neuronal firings of neurons in the brain, begun by this bathing of sound, rhythms in the auditory cortex. How the brain perceives rhythm. MIT News. A study finds the brain is biased towards rhythms based on simpler integer ratios. So the simpler integer ratios are the kind of ratios that we see in harmonics. On that piano back there, the white and black keys are simple integer relationships. Music theory is what these guys are talking about here. The brain perceives rhythms biased towards rhythms of simple integer ratios. These kind of ratios is the fractional ratios that were discovered by Pythagoras, where an octave is 1/2 or double the frequency, about as simple of a ratio as you can possibly get. Cut it in half or double it. And then all the rest are 2/3, 3/4, 4/5, 5/6, 6/7, 7/8. Those kind of ratios are the mathematics of harmonics. That's what we consider to be a pleasing chord, because something about the fact that something that's vibrating at each one of these integers, simple integer relationships of divisions, the vibrational frequencies nest together in a nice, wonderful mathematical way. It's smooth and it fits and the rhythms align. When they're discordant, they don't fit together well. They're bumping into each other. They're not nested. They're creating discordant frequency relationships, perturbations. It's uncomfortable. It's something we don't like. It's something that we don't like very much. So if I go back here to this piano, I think I did this once before. I hit C, and I hit D, and I hit them together. Doesn't sound too good. But if I hit the next one, which is a harmonic third, sounds like a chord. If I hit C and C sharp right next to each other, discordant relationship, doesn't sound good. But all the chords rhythmic relationships of frequencies on a piano. So it's easy to see when you've got something right in front of you like that, where a C and C sharp don't sound good because the vibrational frequencies aren't nesting. But all those other chords that are in harmonic thirds or fifths or sevenths or ninths, then I play certain ones separated by 3 notes or 5 notes. That's a third or a fifth. That forms a nice, pleasing chord. And then the rhythm between the notes creates a whole new thing. It's not just which notes are being hit, but the rhythmic relationships of how they're being played together sets a whole new thing. So this concept of how music itself and the rhythms within music, the rhythms within the frequencies of each of the notes forming chords, and the rhythm of how those notes are struck in relationship to each other, form rhythms within rhythms within rhythms within rhythms. And it's pleasing because this is how the brain works. The brain is constantly looking for these kind of rhythms right in the structure of the neurons themselves. Neuronal firings, as we hear those notes I just played, is lighting up areas of my cortex in a rhythmic relationship to that. And that's pleasing because that's how the brain itself works anyhow. And it's always looking to align itself with rhythmic patterns that nicely fit together. So it's deep in the subconscious mind where brain rhythms synchronize to the musical beats, or just in the musical beats of the rhythmic hitting of those keys in a rhythmic way, aside from which keys I'm hitting, the human brain's neurons fire in sync to music, and trained musicians are better at it than amateurs. Why? Because when you practice, you're creating a new rhythmic relationship with how your muscles contract. The more I move my hands in these different ways and learn how to do that, the more those neural pathways get burned and the easier it all becomes. And pretty soon I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about the notes or where they're located. My fingers know where that is because those pathways are extremely well burned together. I mean, I've been playing, stringed instruments and piano my whole life. So I'm 73, so I started when I was piano lessons when I was 6. So those pathways are like mega super highways for me. They're well-seasoned highways. So I don't have to think. I go down and something starts to happen, and I'm as much a witness as anybody else. I have a creative spark that starts to arise. My muse begins to arise and directs, out of millions of combinations of things that I've screwed around with and played in the past. They're in there someplace, and I can kind of start choosing from different ones and roll them forwards, and sometimes something completely new will come through. It's amazing. And when you talk about something like jazz, a unique American invention, by the way, jazz, we have musicians who are on the fly just allowing something to come through that's never come through before. That's real jazz. You're not playing a song you played before. You're playing a new song that none of you have ever played together before. But the neural pathways of making music is so ingrained with the musicians that they intuitively know where each other is going with this because of the laws of music, musical rules that we all know very well. That if somebody starts a riff that starts to drift towards this way, this guy picks up on it and reinforces that. This other guy hears that and joins in, and pretty soon this thing is off and running on its own. It's this evolving opening flower of music that they're all witnessing and participating in as it unfolds. It's amazing stuff. How brain rhythms can reveal your personality. A new study shows machine learning can be used to predict aspects of a person's personality from their electrical brain rhythms. We sort of know that already the rhythms of brain waves, beta, alpha, theta, delta, is different states of consciousness, and each of us has our own burned pathway of how we use those different faculties of beta, alpha, theta, delta. Some of us spend more time in theta than others, particularly creative people. Theta activity is where creativity happens. So somebody like me who's a musician and an artist, has well-developed theta stuff. I'm, in a daydream, conceiving new ideas. It's who I am. Somebody who's like a mathematician is using a left brain different part, but when they're solving problems, theta is coming out. All of us have a unique picture of how our brain works and which pathways have been explored, all the way down to cell levels and biochemistry, rhythms in production of biochemical hormones from the organs and the glands that are directed from centers in the brain through the hypothalamus into the pituitary gland, which directs out to all the glands and the hypothalamus with the vagus nerve to the organs. Those are all like synchronized up, and that means glands and organs and biochemistry is synchronized up with what's happening in my cortex. All of that is related to each other. It all has to be synchronized. Every time I breathe, every breath I take, I'm oxygenating my tissues, oxygenating the blood that's passing through my lungs, which is synchronized up with my heart and my respiration are hardwired together, synchronized up, so that when I oxygenate my blood and my heart is pumping that blood in relation to the breath rate, then the cells in my body are reaching into the blood for a handful of oxygen just at the time when the oxygen is synchronized passing by at that moment. So all of that stuff, it's sort of kind of mind-boggling to even try to wrap your mind around just what it takes to take a breath and oxygenate your tissues properly so you can function is mind-blowing. So then we've got these, 24-hour clocks that are going on in the brain, and the chemicals and the circadian rhythms, and where blood pressure and melatonin and bowel movements and urination and cardiovascular and all this kind of stuff, melatonin coming out at nighttime to help put you to sleep. It's this amazing thing going on. Here's the suprachasmic nucleus here in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is here. Here's the pituitary gland. Here's the pineal gland. Here's those special sensors in the retina of the eye, sensitive to certain color frequencies, particularly this blue frequency thing. Morning sunlight between 450 to 500 nanometers wavelengths hits the eye. This morning light is integral for setting your circadian rhythms. Suprachasmic nucleus, this little guy here, receives this light and passes inhibitory signals onto the preganglionic sympathetic neurons of the spinal cord. It's like that goes into the sympathetic portion of the autonomic nervous system that controls organs and glands. Pineal gland receives feedback from the paraventricular nucleus in the brainstem and regulates melatonin secretion in the brain, whether it makes me drowsy or awake. All from a certain nanometer frequency of light that we're all synchronized up with in a huge rhythm pattern. Sleep cycles, in a normal sleep cycle throughout the night, usually within the first hour, here's an hour, within that first hour, in about 45 to 50 minutes, we go from awake down through alpha, from the alpha and theta, all the way down to delta, very quickly within the first 45, 50 minutes. Deep delta brain frequencies. And this lasts for about 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. So deep physical recuperation portion of delta sleep for within the first hour for about 15-20 minutes, and then they come back up and out of that, up into some dreaming sleep, alpha sleep and dreaming sleep, and back down to another 15 to 20 minutes. So altogether, the physical recuperation is about 45 minutes, and that's up here getting longer and longer and longer in alpha, and dreaming sleep getting longer and longer, and all together in an 8-hour period, we're getting this kind of rhythmic up and down and up and down and up and down of these different brain frequencies. Another rhythm thing showing up. All these other rhythms, melatonin levels and core body temperature and stress hormones, cortisol, all from the adrenal glands and the autonomic nervous system and the pineal gland, setting my body clocks and stuff like that. It's amazing. Heart waves. the rhythmic contraction of the four ventricles. Boom, 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 boom. That's this rhythm that's going on all day, every day of your whole life for 80 or 90 years. This rhythmic contraction of the four ventricles that are closely associated with the rhythmic contraction of my breathing apparatus because they're hardwired together. Amazing stuff. Here's a 24-hour clock of chi. People who have the same symptom at the same time every day, that's a problem with chi circulation between meridians. The classic one is, people that wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. every night, can't get back to sleep. That's liver meridian. Here's 1 and 3 a.m. So liver meridian is at high tide during that period of time, and if the liver is congested, it can't clean my blood. It's like a big oil filter detoxifying my blood. So if it's sluggish and can't do that, the toxins remain in the blood, end up in the brain, and cause nightmares, agitation. It'll wake me up. All of these things related to sun and moon cycles, cosmic. We're related to the cosmos. It's planetary motions and even astrology, things like that. All planets above or below the horizon and their electromagnetic influence on the Earth and the Earth's influence on us, particularly through things like the Schumann resonance, where the ionosphere's electromagnetic frequencies that are bouncing between the Earth's surface and the inner surface of the ionosphere, and the speed of that bounce is related to the speed of electricity. So that's 7.83 hertz for it to go through one cycle of bounce up and back down again. That right there, 7.83 hertz. And it's electromagnetic, and it's affecting my brain, and my brain is running my body. So we're in training to this. And the ionosphere can fluctuate by solar cycles, lunar cycles, planetary cycles, depending on which planet is closest to the Earth at that point. Its electromagnetic influence of its own ionosphere and magnetic field are interacting with the ionosphere and changing us. As a matter of fact, the Schumann resonance has harmonics. 7.83 hertz is the master, but there's subharmonics that go into all kinds of frequency ranges, and we can shift our brainwave influence to any of these harmonics and raise consciousness. And at a deeper level, it's cosmic rhythm patterns that have been described in ancient literature, particularly in India, where we have the things called the yugas, the grand cycles throughout time, the Dwapara and Treta and Satya and the Kali Yugas. Most people have heard of the Kali Yugas, the dance of destruction by Shiva, But when you look at history, and we see all these kind of demarcations through history, where currently we're in the Kali Yuga of destruction, of the end of things, and the beginning of the next golden age, the golden age and the silver age and the bronze age and the iron age. And at the end of that is the birth of a new, the destruction of the old and the birth of something that comes out of that, like the phoenix coming out of the ashes. According to the Kali Yuga, we're here. Here's Einstein here. In the present moment, we're just about to, at the end of the Kali Yuga and beginning of the next golden age. All of these rhythms within rhythms, cosmic rhythms and atomic rhythms and physical body rhythms and quantum rhythms, all of these things nest together in the key of everything. If I sink into these rhythms and penetrate through them, I find the master rhythm of all rhythms at the core of the quantum field, the core of consciousness itself, that directs the primary note that all of these are harmonics of. The other dimensional wormholes to everything else, every other kind of time dimensional, other universes, parallel realities, all of it synchronized up together in grand universal rhythm patterns, all of which are nested together in mathematics that we see in, say, the golden section ratio. And the golden section ratio is close to the harmonic fifth of the fundamental note that we see in Indian music. The tambura in Indian music has got those four strings. Bum, 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 bum. The tuning ratio of those is the tonic note, bum, 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 and those two strings are tuned to one octave higher of the tonic note. Bum, bum, bum. Those are octaves. And the last note is a harmonic fifth. Bum, 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 bum. So it's reiterating the sacred mathematics of the golden section ratio, which is the foundation principle of all things in nature, including the design of my own body. This is what the Vitruvian Man was all about with Leonardo da Vinci, the guy with the outstretched arms in the circle, exploring the golden section ratio of human body proportions. All of it in a place where everything arises out of sort of nothing. The deep meditation of rhythm, a rhythm of my life, the rhythm of my brain waves, the rhythm of my consciousness, aligns with the nested rhythm patterns of the cosmos, of everything that's happening in a planetary system, in sun and moon cycles and planetary cycles and galactic cycles and universal cycles, all of it reflected in miniature in my atomic cycles and my atoms and what my atoms are made of. And at the core of all of that is a quantum field, which is in a state of vibrational resonance, nested standing waves, rhythms within rhythms within rhythms. It's the grand universal dance. And we're in that dance, and we're in that dance together. And we're about to accentuate that dance with musical rhythms and brainwave entrainment rhythms that are delivered through headphones that we're about to do right now. So put your headphones on, and here we go. We're getting close your eyes, and here we go. is where you can get that soundtrack. So next week, as we keep our rhythm going here, it will be Sunday at 12:30 next week as well. I do have some workshops coming up at some point where there will be a minor perturbation, but I'll let you know closer to that when that happens. So for now, happy, healthy, holy, take care of yourselves. It's a weird world still, but be healthy and take care of yourself.